Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we're making another favorite of ours. Okay, I know I can't say every recipe is our favorite, but this is one of our fall favorites. This is our Æblekage recipe. This is actually one of the first recipes we posted on the blog almost 3 years ago. It's a nice soft sponge with apple in the batter and then apples on top, with a little bit of cinnamon and vanilla flavoring. Now that it's apple picking season, it's a great way to use up a few apples that you might have picked. Before we start making the cake batter, we're gonna preheat our oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. The first thing we're gonna do is prepare our apples for the cake. Usually we use 3 medium apples for this recipe. Today I have 2 quite large apples, so I'm only gonna need these 2. We're adding in 3/4 of 1 apple chopped up to the batter. This is optional, but it gives a lot more apple flavor. If you're using medium apples, you can add in 1 whole apple. With the remaining quarter and the other apple, I'm going to slice them, and that's gonna serve as our decoration for the top of the cake. The apples are prepped. We have the chopped apple and the sliced apple. We're gonna set these aside while we work on the cake batter. If you're worried about these oxidizing or turning brown while they're sitting, you can always add a little squeeze of lemon juice to the apples. For this cake batter, we're combining our wet ingredients and our dry ingredients separately. I have 120 milliliters of vegetable oil, 120 milliliters of milk. You can use whatever milk you like to use. And I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. I'm just going to combine this in a measuring cup so it's easy to pour into the batter. It's not going to combine in here because oil and milk don't mix, but I just want all the liquids to be in one container. Setting this aside, and now we're going to work on our dry ingredients. For our dry ingredients, I have 200 grams of all-purpose flour in this bowl, and I'm going to add a teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of baking powder, and half a teaspoon of salt. Usually with cakes, it's best to sift in your dry ingredients so there aren't any lumps. We find that if you whisk them together really well beforehand, it's almost the same thing. But definitely feel free to sift in your dry ingredients when you're adding them to the batter. I'm setting the dry ingredients aside, and we're finally gonna start working on the batter. As you may have guessed, I really like using my KitchenAid to mix things. It makes things a lot easier, but you can also use a handheld mixer. It might be a little bit more difficult to do this with a hand whisk, but it can be done. Today, I'm using the whisk attachment. I have 2 large eggs and 200 grams of granulated sugar. I'm gonna add this to the bowl of my stand mixer. There's one important detail I forgot to mention, which is that I'm using room temperature eggs. If you forgot to take your eggs out of the fridge ahead of time, you can always fill a bowl with warm water, put the eggs in there for 10 minutes, and that should bring them up to a good temperature to use in cakes. I'm going to whip together the eggs and the sugar until they have doubled or tripled in volume, and the mixture should turn very pale in color as well. After around 3 to 5 minutes of whipping the eggs and sugar together, you should be left with this very foamy egg mixture that has definitely doubled in size. It should feel somewhat thick when you run the whisk through it, and when you lift the attachment out, you should see the egg and sugar flow off and kind of rest there for a moment on top of the surface before sinking in. And this is called ribbon stage in cake making. We have our prepared wet and dry ingredients. We're gonna mix this in a few stages by adding in half of the wet mixture, then half of the dry, the remaining wet mixture, and the remaining dry. And that should create a well-combined batter without knocking the air out of the eggs and sugar that we just worked so hard to get into it. Now it's time for half of the dry. Again, I whisk this together really well beforehand, but you can always sift it in if that's what you prefer. This is the remaining wet ingredients. And now we're adding in the last of the dry. And the key here really is to not over mix it. We're only running the mixer for about 5 seconds each time. You might see a little bit of the flour mixture around the edges. For the rest of this, just to make sure that I don't overmix, I'm going to use a spatula and just fold the batter a few times. Make sure that everything is well combined. Last but not least, we're adding in our chopped apples. And I'm just gonna fold it through the mixture so that they're well dispersed. And that's our cake batter done. I'm baking this cake in a 9-inch round pan. So to prep the pan, I'm going to oil it and then add a parchment round to the bottom. I'm just going to cut a square piece of parchment paper to a circle. Now this is prepped, we're going to add our batter. Now we're gonna have some fun with the decorating. We have our sliced apples. I like to arrange them in a circular pattern, so there's an outer circle and an inner circle. And we're gonna sprinkle a little bit of brown sugar and some cinnamon on the top. Now the cake is ready to go in the oven. It's going to bake for around 40 to 45 minutes. The cake is done baking. It's cooled for around 5 minutes in the tin. So now we're going to take it out and put it on a cooling rack so it can fully cool. Our cake is cooled. Now it's time to slice it and try it. It's the perfect fall dessert. A lot of apple flavor, cinnamon is great. You can also use pumpkin pie spice. And the cake is super moist because of the oil and the apples. It's so good. Thank you so much for watching our video. We hope you try out this recipe. Let us know in the comments if you try it out, and we'll see you for the next recipe. Bye.